Welcome back to Sociology Droids. Today we're going deep on Pierre Bourdieu's outline of a theory of practice.
Oh, yeah, this one.
Yeah, it's a classic.
The big one.
But definitely not a light read.
Not at all.
So we're going to break it down, help you navigate all the dense ideas, and we're going to focus specifically on the arguments and claims that he's making in the book.
Sounds good.
So if you're a grad student wrestling with Bourdieu right now, this deep dive is for you.
Definitely will be helpful for that.
All right, so I guess the first thing that really struck me about this book was how Bourdieu kind of sets up his whole approach to understanding social practices.
Yeah.
He's really critiquing that objectivist perspective, right?
Absolutely. He actually lays out 3 different modes of theoretical knowledge.
Okay.
So you've got the phenomenological,
Yep.
you have objectivist, and then you have the practical mode of knowledge. And he's arguing that that objectivist viewpoint, which is often, all about the fixed rules and structures, that misses all those nuances of how people actually live and experience their social world.
Right. It's like the ideal versus the real.
Exactly.
And he uses this really interesting example from his fieldwork in Kabylia to illustrate this point.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how Kabyle customary law is different from Weber's concept of Kadai justice.
Right, because it's not based on this rigid set of rules.
Right.
It's codified, written down.
Right. It's much more fluid.
Yeah. He found that it works more through a set of shared understandings or principles that people apply to specific situations.
Look at that practical knowledge.
Exactly. And it's so interesting how he puts it. He says, the rule is never in this case more than a second best intended to make good. The occasional misfirings of the collective enterprise of inculcation tending to produce habitus that are capable of generating practices regulated without express regulation or any institutionalized call to order.
Whoa. Okay, so much to unpack there.
I know, right? But basically it sounds like instead of consulting a rule book, right?
Yeah.
The Kabyles are relying on this more intuitive sense of what's appropriate in different contexts.
Exactly. And this is where that concept of habitus comes in.
Okay. Yes, habitus, this is a big one. It is. And Bourdieu defines it as a system of durable, transposable dispositions, structured structures, predisposed to function as structuring structures. That is, as principles which generate and organize practices and representations that can be objectively adapted to their outcomes without presupposing a conscious aiming at ends or an express mastery of the operations necessary in order to attain them.
Okay, I'm already feeling a bit lost in the jargon.
I know, right?
Can we maybe break down what habitus actually means?
Yeah.
In simpler terms?
For sure. So think of it this way. Imagine you are a grad student.
Okay.
Navigating the complex world of academia.
Been there.
Right? So you're learning all those unwritten rules.
Oh, yeah.
Figuring out, whose research you should cite, whose classes to take,
right,
how to present yourself at conferences. All of those things that aren't formal rules.
Yes.
But you're picking them up through just experience and observation.
So it's learning the social game of academia.
Exactly. That's your academic habitus in the making.
Okay.
It's a set of ingrained dispositions, tendencies, and perceptions that are shaped by your experience within that specific field.
That makes sense.
And Bourdieu argues that, the habitus is this link between objective social structures and individual practices.
Okay. Starting to see the connections here. Good. But Bourdieu also really emphasizes that the habitus is largely unconscious, right?
Yes, definitely.
It's not we're, walking around thinking time to activate my habitus.
Right. It's more like a set of deeply ingrained habits and perceptions that are operating, below the level of conscious awareness.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense.
And to illustrate this, he looks at the structure of Kabyle houses.
Okay.
And how they reflect and reinforce the habitus. So he found a system of oppositions built into the physical space.
What kind of oppositions?
High and low, male and female.
Oh, wow.
So the house itself becomes a way of teaching and transmitting cultural values and practices.
So the house is an embodied textbook.
Precisely. He argues that children learn their vision of the world through their bodily experiences within this space.
Oh, wow.
The layout, the objects, the activities, all of that contributes to the formation of the habitus.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and he has this great quote where he says, "The mind born of the world of objects does not rise as a subjectivity confronting an objectivity. The objective universe is made up of objects which are the product of objectifying operations structured according to the very structures which the mind applies to it."
My brain is like bending a little bit trying to process that.
Dig deep.
Yeah. But it's so interesting how he's connecting like the physical space
Yeah,
to the way people think
exactly.
and then to their actions. But does he talk about how this habitus thing plays out in other aspects of like Kabyle society?
He does.
Does he give any other concrete examples?
Yeah, so he extends this analysis to the experience of sexuality,
Oh,
showing how the Kabyle understanding of masculinity and femininity is also deeply embodied.
okay.
And he argues that the specifically male relation to sexuality is that of sublimation, the symbolism of honor, tending at once to refuse any direct expression of sexuality and to encourage its transfigured manifestation in the form of manly prowess.
So even something as like personal as sexuality
Yeah.
is shaped by these like broader social structures and symbolic systems.
Exactly. It's all connected.
That's a powerful statement,
It is, and it leads us to another key concept in his theory,
which is,
symbolic capital.
okay, all right, let's dive into that.
Let's do it.
So what exactly is symbolic capital?
Okay, so think of it as like the prestige, the honor,
yeah.
the social recognition that individuals accumulate through their actions and relationships.
So it's not like material wealth.
No, it's not about like money or possessions,
right.
but it can be incredibly valuable
Right.
in certain social contexts.
Makes sense.
And Bourdieu argues that in Kabylia, symbolic capital plays a huge role in things like marriage alliances
Yeah.
and settling disputes.
So it's like social currency that grants you influence and standing within the community.
Exactly. It's like how much weight your word carries,
Right.
how much people respect you and your opinions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And he uses the example of gift exchange in Kabyle society
Okay.
to show how symbolic capital is accumulated and maintained.
Interesting.
And he highlights the importance of the illusion of disinterestedness in these exchanges.
The illusion of what?
Disinterestedness.
Okay.
So it's like you can't be too obvious that you're calculating your own advantage.
Oh, so it has to seem genuine.
Right, exactly. Because if it becomes clear that you're just trying to, get ahead,
People see through it.
yeah, the whole system breaks down.
So it's like this delicate balance
Yeah.
between like strategy and authenticity.
Exactly.
But he also points out that like the nature of these exchanges like differs depending on the social distance between the individuals involved, right?
Yes, absolutely. He makes a distinction between the bunya,
The what?
which means like man of good faith,
Okay.
who operates within a system of trust and reciprocity,
Okay.
especially among like close kin.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the more like impersonal contract-based transactions that occur in like the wider market.
So like within the family or a close-knit community,
Yeah.
trust and reputation are like paramount.
Yes.
But as you move further out from those close relationships,
Right.
the emphasis shifts to these more like formal economic arrangements.
Exactly. And he actually says economic capital can be accumulated only in the form of symbolic capital, the unrecognizable and hence socially recognizable form of the other kinds of capital.
Wow. It's fascinating how he reveals all these like subtle strategies and power dynamics
Yeah.
that operate even in something as seemingly simple as like gift giving.
Right. And this all ties into another important concept.
Okay, hit me with it.
Doxa.
Doxa. That rings a bell.
It might.
Can you remind me what that one refers to?
So doxa refers to those like unquestioned, taken for granted beliefs that constitute the common sense of a society.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I remember now.
So they're like those fundamental assumptions about the world that people rarely question.
Or even think about.
Exactly. They just like...
Or like the water we swim in.
Yes, and Bourdieu argues that the mythico-ritual system of the Kabyles plays a big role in this.
Okay.
Particularly in how it structures the division of labor between the sexes
Yeah.
and their understanding of time.
Okay, so it's like these deeply ingrained beliefs actually help to maintain the existing social order
They do.
by making it seem natural and unquestionable.
Exactly.
But didn't we talk about earlier that even doxa can be like challenged and transformed
We did.
when societies encounter new ideas and practices? So he gave that example of like the changing perceptions of illness and death among the Kabyles.
Yes, because of the influence of modern medicine.
Right, and different conceptions of health and mortality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a reminder that doxa isn't static.
Right.
It's dynamic,
Yes, always changing.
responsive to like social change.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like even the most fundamental beliefs
Mm-hmm.
about life and death can be challenged and transformed
They can.
as societies like evolve and encounter new ideas.
Right.
This is blowing my mind a little bit.
I know, it's a lot.
But I'm wondering, like, how are these beliefs and practices actually transmitted
Yeah.
and reproduced across generations?
That's a great question.
Like, what's the mechanism at play here?
That's where generative schemes come in.
Okay, generative schemes, another term I need help with.
Happy to help.
What are they exactly?
So think of them as like underlying principles or like mental blueprints that guide people's actions and perceptions.
Okay.
So they shape how people understand and respond to the world around them.
Even if they're not consciously aware of them.
Right, exactly.
So they're kind of like the software running in the background,
Yeah, a good way to put it.
shaping how we process information to make decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Bourdieu argues that these schemes are like unconsciously learned and applied in different domains of social life.
Okay, and he gives the example of the agrarian calendar, right?
It does.
And its homologous relationship to other aspects of Kabyle life. Wait, homologous relationship, what does that even mean?
So think about it like this. The cyclical patterns of the agrarian calendar,
Okay.
with its emphasis on the opposition between like the wet and dry seasons, are mirrored in other areas of Kabyle life,
Okay.
like cooking and even the cycle of life itself.
So there's like a deep structural similarity between these different aspects of their lives.
Yes, even if people aren't consciously aware of it.
Wow, so it's like the agrarian calendar provides this template for understanding time itself.
Right.
And this shapes their entire worldview. And that's where doxa comes in.
It does.
Because this understanding of time is so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
It just becomes part of their taken for granted reality.
Mm-hmm.
They don't question it.
Nope.
They don't challenge it.
It just is.
And in doing so, it reinforces the existing social order,
Exactly.
including the division of labor between men and women,
Right.
without anyone really having to think about it.
It's just how things are.
That's wild.
It is.
But as we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
even doxa can be challenged and transformed,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
When societies encounter new ideas and practices.
Mm-hmm.
And Bourdieu notes that even in Kabylia, the introduction of modern medicine
Yeah.
and different conceptions of like health and mortality
Mm-hmm.
started to disrupt these traditional beliefs
Right.
about illness and death.
So it's not completely fixed.
Right.
It can change.
Okay, so this whole discussion about doxa
Yeah.
is making me think about how we often like operate on autopilot in our own lives.
Oh,
You know, we take so much for granted
we do.
without ever really stopping to examine those like underlying assumptions
Mm-hmm.
that shape our perceptions and actions.
It's true.
But going back to this idea of learned ignorance,
Yeah.
I'm still like struggling with how we
Yeah.
as social scientists can actually study something that's unconscious.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It seems like a methodological paradox.
It kind of is.
So how do we do that?
Well, Bourdieu argues that we need to be careful
Okay.
about taking people's explanations of their own practices
Yeah.
at face value.
Like what they say they're doing.
Exactly, because often individuals describe their actions
Yeah.
in terms of rules or like conscious decisions
Okay.
when the underlying logic is actually something quite different.
So it's not always a conscious choice.
Right. Sometimes it's more about like those ingrained habits.
The habitus.
Yes, exactly.
So we can't just rely on people's like self-reported motivations.
Mhm.
We need to dig deeper and look for that deeper, often unspoken logic that's
Mhm.
driving their actions.
Exactly. It's like detective work.
Right.
We have to look for the clues.
It's like we need to become detectives of the social world.
Yes, I like that.
Okay. But how do we do that without falling into the trap of imposing our own interpretations?
That's the key, isn't it?
It is.
So Bourdieu argues that we need to be attentive to the specific context
Okay.
in which those social practices occur.
So like the who, what, where, when, why.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of understanding the social field.
Social field. Okay.
Yeah, he defines it as the structured space of positions
Okay.
where individuals and groups are competing for resources and power.
So like a battlefield.
Kind of, but more like a game
Yeah.
where everyone's trying to win.
Got it.
But each field has its own specific rules of the game,
Uh-huh.
its own forms of capital,
Okay.
and its own strategies for success.
So like to understand why someone acts the way they do, we need to consider that specific social field they're operating in
Mm-hmm.
and the stakes involved.
Exactly. It's not enough to just observe behavior.
Right.
We need to understand that larger context and the power dynamics.
Yeah, those power dynamics are always lurking.
They are.
Okay, so he gives an example of this with his analysis of gift exchange practices, right?
He does.
Can you walk me through that?
So he notes that the character of gift exchange
Okay.
varies depending on the social distance between those individuals.
So like if you're giving a gift to your best friend
Yeah.
versus like a distant acquaintance.
Exactly.
It's going to have a different meaning.
Exactly. So among close kin,
Mm-hmm.
there's an emphasis on trust and reciprocity.
Okay.
Gifts function as expressions of solidarity and mutual obligation.
Right.
But as that social distance increases,
Uh-huh.
those exchanges become more explicitly economic,
Okay.
with a greater emphasis on formal guarantees and contracts.
I like that trust factor goes down.
It does.
And the need for, like, formal agreements goes up.
Precisely.
Wow. So the meaning and function of a gift
Yeah.
changes depending on who's giving it and who's receiving it,
It does.
and the specific relationship between them.
It's all about the context.
So it's not just about the object itself,
Right.
but the social significance attached to it.
Exactly.
This is making me think about how we often misinterpret each other's actions
Mm-hmm.
because we're not attuned to those subtle cues
Yeah.
and unspoken rules that govern social interaction.
Bourdieu would say that's because we lack an understanding of that specific habitus
Okay.
and generative schemes that shape people's perceptions and actions.
So like we're all operating with different software,
In a way, yes.
and that's why we sometimes clash.
Exactly.
But wait, he also says that habitus isn't like fixed, right?
No, it's not. It's constantly being shaped and reshaped.
So it's dynamic,
Okay.
responsive to the social world around us.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this is where the concept of practice becomes really important.
Okay, practice. Break that down for me.
So for Bourdieu, practice isn't just about following rules
Okay.
or applying pre-existing schemas.
It's more than that.
It's about a constant process of improvisation
Okay.
and adjustment.
As individuals navigate those complex social situations.
Right, and respond to unexpected events.
So it's like you're always learning,
You are.
always adapting.
Exactly.
So it's not about rote memorization, but knowing how to play the game
Yes,
and adapt to those changing circumstances.
precisely. And he compares social practice to playing chess.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, where skilled players can anticipate their opponent's moves
Uh-huh.
and develop strategies.
Without necessarily being able to articulate the specific rules.
Exactly.
It's like they just have a feel for it.
They do.
It's that learned ignorance
Exactly.
that allows individuals to act effectively within their social field.
And that's what objectivist approaches miss.
Oh,
They focus too much on those explicit rules
Uh-huh.
and conscious calculation.
And they don't capture this like intuitive dimension of social practice.
Exactly. They're missing the art of the game,
Right.
the feel for it.
Yeah, it's not just about the rules. It's about how you play the game.
Right. And that's something that you learn through practice.
I feel like we've covered so much already,
We have.
and my brain is starting to hurt a little bit.
I know, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
Should we pause here?
Yeah, let's take a break,
Okay.
and we'll come back for part 2
Sounds good.
and delve into even more of Bourdieu's mind-bending ideas.
Can't wait.
All right, we are back and ready for more Bourdieu.
Diving back in.
So last time we were talking about all sorts of things like habitus, symbolic capital,
Yeah,
even doxa.
it's a lot.
It is. And, you know, one of the things that really stuck with me was this whole idea of learned ignorance.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does. It really challenges like my assumptions about how people actually operate in the social world.
Right. It's not always so conscious and calculated. It's more like we're playing a game, but we don't even know all the rules.
Yeah. And somehow we're still winning.
Well, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose.
Right. That's true.
But the point is, we're playing.
We're in the game.
Exactly.
Before we move on, though,
Yeah.
can we revisit the concept of doxa for a second?
Sure.
I'm still kind of grappling with how these unquestioned beliefs actually function to like maintain the social order.
Yeah, it can seem kind of abstract.
It does.
So let's think about an example from Bourdieu's work in Kabylia.
Okay.
He talks about how their mythico-ritual system really shapes their understanding of time.
Go.
And in particular, their perception of the agrarian calendar.
What a calendar, right?
Yeah, and this calendar, with its emphasis on the cyclical rhythm of the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about agricultural practices.
Right. It's more than
It becomes like a framework for understanding all these different aspects of life,
like what kinds of things?
like cooking rituals, the cycle of life and death.
So it's like the calendar provides this template for understanding time itself.
Exactly.
And then that shapes their entire worldview.
Right, it's all connected.
Wow. Okay, so where does doxa fit into all of this?
Well, because this understanding of time is so deeply ingrained,
Yeah.
it becomes part of their taken for granted reality.
They don't even question it.
Nope.
It just did.
Exactly. And in doing so, it reinforces the existing social order.
So it's like the calendar is naturalizing these social arrangements.
Precisely.
But like we were talking about before, even doxa can be challenged, right?
I can.
When societies encounter new ideas, Bourdieu gives that example of the changing perceptions of illness and death in Kabylia.
Right, because of the introduction of modern medicine.
Right, new ways of thinking about health and mortality.
And that creates a space for questioning those old assumptions.
So it's not like doxa is set in stone.
Definitely not. It's dynamic, it changes.
This whole discussion is making me think about how much we just operate on autopilot in our own lives.
Yeah, totally.
We take so much for granted.
We do.
Without ever really like examining those underlying assumptions
It's true.
that shape how we see the world and how we act in it.
It's like we're sleepwalking through life.
Kind of, but going back to this idea of learned ignorance,
Yeah.
I'm still wrestling with this question of like how we as social scientists can actually study something that's unconscious.
Right, because how do you observe something that people aren't even aware of?
Exactly. It seems impossible.
It's tricky.
So how do we do it?
Well, Bourdieu says we need to be really careful about taking people's explanations of their own actions at face value.
Okay, so like what they say they're doing.
Right, because they might say they're doing something for one reason, but the real reason might be something totally different.
So like with those Kabyle marriage patterns.
Yeah, people might talk about preferential cross-cousin marriage like it's strict rule,
Right.
but the actual practice is way more complex.
Right. It's not just about following the rules.
It's about strategy and power dynamics and all these other factors.
So we can't just take their word for it.
Nope, we have to look deeper.
Become like social detectives.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, Bourdieu says we need to be really attentive to the context,
To context, okay.
the specific social field where those practices are happening.
Social field, remind me what that is again.
It's that structured space of positions where individuals and groups are competing for resources and power.
Okay, like a game with winners and losers.
Kind of, but each field has its own rules, its own forms of capital, its own strategies for success.
So to understand why someone does something, we need to understand the rules of their game.
Exactly. And the stakes involved.
Okay, that makes sense.
So Bourdieu gives this great example with gift exchange.
Okay, gift exchange, right?
Yeah, he says the meaning of a gift changes depending on the social distance between the people involved.
Okay, so like giving a gift to your best friend is different from giving a gift to your boss.
Exactly. And he says that among close kin gift exchange is all about trust and reciprocity.
Like reinforcing those bonds.
Yeah, right. But as the social distance increases, those exchanges become more explicitly economic.
More about contracts and guarantees.
Precisely.
It's like the trust factor goes down and the need for formal agreements goes up.
Exactly.
This is blowing my mind.
That's a lot. I know.
It's like all these hidden rules and meanings behind these everyday interactions.
Right. And Bourdieu is helping us see them.
I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light.
That's the power of Bourdieu.
But how do we actually study this stuff?
Well, he argues for a very specific kind of participant observation.
Okay, participant observation, but like what's so special about his approach?
He says we need to immerse ourselves in the social world we're studying.
So not just observe from a distance.
No, we need to participate.
Participate. Why?
Really get a feel for the game ourselves.
That sounds intense,
It is.
but also really exciting.
It is.
Like we're not just researchers anymore.
Right, we're players in the game.
I like it.
But it's not easy.
What do you mean?
We have to be aware of our own position in the field. Oh, right, our own biases.
Exactly, and be reflexive about how we're shaping the very thing we're trying to study.
That's a lot to juggle.
It is.
But I think it's worth it
I agree.
to get that deeper understanding
Exactly.
of how the social world really works.
That's what it's all about.
So Bourdieu is not just giving us a theory,
Yeah.
he's giving us a whole new way of doing social science.
He is.
It's a challenge,
It is.
but it's also an invitation.
To see the world differently.
I'm in.
Me too.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our Bourdieu deep dive.
Yeah, ready to wrap things up.
I feel like my brain has expanded like 10 sizes.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's been so worth it.
Definitely.
One of the things that's really staying with me is that idea of learned ignorance.
Oh, yeah. It's such a great concept.
It is. It's like we're all experts in our own little world.
Right. We know how to do things.
But we can't always explain why we do them.
It's like we're operating on instinct.
Or intuition. Exactly. And that's what Bourdieu is trying to get at with that concept.
It's like we've internalized these rules of the game.
Yeah, through experience, through practice.
But we're not always consciously aware of them.
And that's why it's so hard to study.
Right. Because how do you observe something that people aren't even aware of themselves?
It's a challenge for sure.
But Bourdieu gives us some tools.
He does. He gives us a way of seeing the world differently.
And a way of doing social science differently.
Exactly.
So one of the things he talks about is the importance of understanding the social field.
Oh, yeah. The social field is key.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's basically this idea that, like, every social space has its own set of rules.
Right. It's like a game.
With its own players.
And its own stakes.
And to really understand how people operate in that field,
yeah.
you have to understand the rules of the game.
Exactly. And the power dynamics.
The power dynamics always come into play.
Always.
So, like, for example, he talks about gift exchange.
Yeah, gift exchange is a great example.
It is, because it seems like such a simple thing.
Right. You're just giving someone a present.
But Bourdieu shows us that there's all this, like, hidden meaning and social significance.
Depending on who's giving the gift.
And who's receiving it.
And the relationship between them.
It's not just about the object itself.
Right. It's about the social act.
And the symbolic capital that's being exchanged.
It's all about those unspoken rules.
And Bourdieu gives us a way of decoding those rules.
He does.
Through his method of participant observation.
Yeah, participant observation is key for Bourdieu.
It is, because it's not just about observing people from a distance.
No, it's about immersing yourself in their world.
Becoming a participant.
Exactly, getting your hands dirty.
Right, and that's how you start to understand the logic of practice.
The logic of practice. Yeah, that's what it's all about.
It's like learning a new language.
In a way, it is.
You can't just study the grammar.
No, you have to speak it.
You have to live it.
And that's what Bourdieu is asking us to do as social scientists.
It's
for sure.
But it's also incredibly rewarding.
It is, because it gives us this deeper understanding of how the social world actually works.
It's like seeing behind the curtain.
Exactly. And that's the power of Bourdieu's work.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job unpacking some of these complex ideas.
I think so too.
And I hope our listeners are feeling a bit more confident.
Yeah, less intimidated by Bourdieu.
He's definitely a challenging thinker.
He is.
But he's also one of the most important sociologists of our time.
I agree.
So if you're grappling with his work,
don't give up.
Keep wrestling with those ideas.
It's worth the effort.
It is, because Bourdieu gives us a way of seeing the world.
And understanding it.
In a whole new light.
And that's pretty powerful stuff.
So that's it for our deep dive into Pierre Bourdieu's outline of a theory of practice.
Hope you enjoyed it.
We'll see you next time for another sociological adventure.
Until then, keep those minds thinking.
And those critiques flowing.